Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so happy you're here to share my love of board gaming with me on this rather windy day in April. I hope the wind noise doesn't get too irritating, but 2023 continues to be an exceptional year for gaming. Thanks, Paul. In the month of March, I played 12 unique games, of which 6 of them I rated 8 out of 10 or higher, so get ready to hear about some great games. Just before I get into these 12 games that I've played, I actually acquired a couple of new board games for the month of March. And this is because I woke up one morning to discover that a viewer named Matthew had sent some money to my PayPal account just out of the blue, just out of appreciation for the videos I make here. And if you've been following along with me lately, you'll probably know that at the moment, my budget for books, board games, entertainment, eating out, anything fun is, let me calculate quickly, that would be $0 per month. So I was so excited to receive this gift. I drove straight to one of my friendly local game shops and I picked up one game that I've been really wanting to acquire, and I found another game on their clearance shelf that was only $15 that I had read about sometime in the past, and I thought, hey, for $15 this is worth a shot. So I did manage to get both of those games played in the month of March. One of them ended up being my very best game of the month, the other being one of my very worst games of the month. So I'm going to talk about specifics as I get into now the games that I played. Going in order, as usual, from the game that I rated the lowest in the month to the game that I rated highest for the month, we're going to start off with kind of a little fun kids party game that I've had for ages and ages called Sorry Sliders. This is a very basic dexterity game where you're sliding this piece down a little track, trying to get it into the scoring section, and you can play with basically 2 to 4 players who each have their little sliding pieces that they're trying to score with. I pulled this out because my younger son Wyatt had one of his little school friends over, and I set it up thinking that they might be interested in playing it. They didn't end up playing it, but since it was set up, I ended up playing it with Wyatt later. We played a quick game of it. When the kids were younger, I think this was a bigger hit. They're kind of outgrowing the game at this point. It's not quite as fun as it used to be. I rated about 5.5 out of 10 at this point, although it was definitely fun when the kids were younger. The next one is that game I mentioned that I picked up on clearance for $15, and this is Prowler's Passage. I do admit I was sucked in by the theme of the game, where players are supposedly competing rogue or thief guilds in the city trying to get the most influence in different areas, and the kind of cool cover there on the front drew me in. But the gameplay itself is interesting. I mean, there is randomness to the setup, so that every game you play is going to be different from the next because of how the board is set up randomly, how the tokens are set up randomly, and then the goals you're working towards. There's a whole deck of cards of goals, and you only use a few of them per game. So there's interesting variety in the way the game is set up, but once it's all set up, it is a purely tactical game. There's no luck involved with it whatsoever. All the information's right there in front of you, and you're just doing your thing, and luck doesn't play a part anymore. However, the game itself is pretty dry. You're basically placing these passages in the tiles that represent the city. Based on where you're placing your passage, you're collecting a couple of tokens, and based on the tokens you collect, you're advancing certain other tokens on a track that's kind of like a tug-of-war thing, where you move it towards yourself if you collect the tokens that match it, or if your opponent collects tokens, they will move it towards themselves on the score track. And based on whether these scoring tokens end up on your side of the board or your opponent's side of the board, it's strictly a 2-player game. They will provide certain scoring advantages. So in theory, it's kind of interesting in that it is purely a tactical game, but it feels totally themeless and fairly dry and uninteresting as far as abstract strategy games go. I rated the game 5.5 out of 10, although if I had somebody to try it with, I would definitely try it again to see if I could pull anything more out of the game. But Paul ended up giving it a dismal 4.5 out of 10, so I'm certainly not going to ask him to play it again with me. So ultimately, I think it's going to just end up on the for sale pile, and I doubt I'll end up getting back to it again. Next up is the most recent board game to hit the #1 spot of all time on BoardGameGeek.com, which is a really big deal because there's only a handful of board games over the years that have reached that #1 top voted game by all the users of Board Game Geek, and this is Brass Birmingham. Brass Birmingham. So over the years, I've had kind of this relationship with the Board Game Geek ratings whereby if a game was one of the top rated games on Board Game Geek, it probably meant that it would be a game that I would not enjoy, because at least in the past, the games that reached those high positions tended to be the big, long, complex, heavy Euro style games that I am just not into. However, a few years back, the game Gloomhaven reached that #1 spot, and Gloomhaven is one of the 3 games that I say is tied as my #1 personal favorite game of all time, along with Pandemic Legacy Season 1 and Plank Legacy Acquisitions Incorporated. So when Gloomhaven hit that #1 spot, I realized, I guess maybe people are seeing more love for these more thematic games, although part of the reason is that nowadays there's less divide between the old camps of Euro-style games versus Ameritrash games, the heavy, thinky, themeless game versus the very thematic, random dice-chucking adventure type of games. Now we are seeing more of hybrids of the two, and that's what Gloomhaven ended up being. So Brass Birmingham, however, is definitely a throwback to that old, heavier Euro-style game, and even though I know that that's not typically the type of game I enjoy, I knew that Paul owned a copy of the game, and so I thought, well, it'd be at least interesting to try it out. So I borrowed the game from Paul, I read through the rule book, was immediately completely confused as to what was going on and how all this information I just read was supposed to work together in a cohesive gameplay experience. But I watched some videos, I reread the rule book, read kind of player aids, and eventually figured it all out and sat down and played it with Paul. And my first play, I thought, yeah, I really don't enjoy this style of game. It was about 3.5 hours total for me to explain the rules to Paul and then play through the game, and it was a struggle. I didn't come away feeling great from it, but I had invested all this time, quite a long time, into getting a firm grasp of the rules, and I wanted to at least try it another time. So on a future play, Paul and I played a second game, and this one came together much better for me, partly because I understood the game better, and partly because I just randomly drew some cards that had me stumble into this powerful strategy of focusing on building pottery buildings, which award a ton of points, and kind of worked out for me that I drew the right cards and that the gameplay experience allowed me to build them. And I did very well in the game, and I thought slightly better of the game, not because I did well in the game per se, but because I kind of understood how it was all working together a little better. That card play aspect of the game is a little bit strange to me because the game gives players a choice of roughly 7 or so actions they can do, including a pass action, which I don't think any player would ever use unless some really weird circumstances came up. But basically, you need a specific card for the build action of the game, and then all the rest of the actions, you just discard any card you want to perform the action. It's just meaningless what's on the card. So what's on the card only has meaning for the build action, which is a little bit strange for cards that can be considered to be sort of multi-use, in that you need specific cards for build, but any card for anything else. But that build action is pretty important, and what I found, especially with this last game I played that worked well, is in the first half of the game, in the canal phase of the game, I was getting a terrible selection of cards that didn't really allow me to build where I wanted to build. But then in the second half of the game, during the rail phase, I got all the right cards, and like I said, kind of stumbled into this pottery building strategy that allowed me to fly up the scoreboard to victory, and also made me realize that players have got to kind of keep an eye on that when it comes to interacting with each other, I guess, in the game. But anyhow, my first play of the game, I was thinking about kind of a 5.5 out of 10 as a rating. After my slightly more positive second game and understanding the game a bit better, I moved that up to 6 out of 10, which obviously isn't a super high rating. I think it did kind of establish that, yeah, I'm really not a fan of these big, heavy Euro-style games. And one reason why this particular game wasn't a huge hit for me was that it feels like everything you're trying to do to progress in the game is such a struggle. You're just trying to eke out what meager resources are there to just take the next agonizing step forward, and then work hard to take the next little step forward. And it's one of these Martin Wallace games that feels difficult and a little bit frustrating, and I don't like necessarily having that feeling in a board game. Yes, it feels good to be challenged and to have to think through strategies and stuff, but it isn't as rewarding an experience. I would much rather play a game like Railways of the World by Martin Wallace, for instance, or his game Steam, I think, is really well done. Those are more my jam than this kind of tougher play experience. Oh, another Martin Wallace game that feels maybe slightly challenging too, but I enjoyed more in the past, was called First Train to Nuremberg. That was one that I had previously owned and enjoyed quite a bit too. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the new #1 game on Board Game Geek. Obviously, I'm in the minority there in terms of the type of person who will go on Board Game Geek and create an account and rate board games. So, in other words, the real serious board gamers. But yeah, I'm definitely glad I took the time to learn it and try it out anyhow. Oh yeah, Paul rates Brass Birmingham 9 out of 10, so he loves the game. It was definitely one of the biggest rating differences Paul and I have ever had, because we're usually pretty close in terms of our personal enjoyment of games. Now the next one is a game that I played solo because I had purchased it during a Steam sale for a while back, and so this is one I played on my computer. It was the digital version of Wings of Glory, a very fun little game of First World War air combat that is built around the idea of simultaneous action selection, where you each have your aircraft on the board, and each airplane has its own deck of cards that represents its maneuvers that it can perform. And so every turn, players will plan out 3 back-to-back maneuvers that they're going to do for the turn, so the plane can fly around, make turns, go straight, whatever they want to do. And then everybody reveals one card at a time. Based on the card they played, they move their little aircraft miniature on the board and hopefully get lined up to take shots at your opponent. And so it's one that is definitely fun to play in person because of that simultaneous play aspect of it. I enjoy that kind of play in games like Colt Express and Lords of Zidit, for example. Those are both games that use simultaneous action selection, and it is fun in Wings of Glory, although playing it against the computer isn't quite as rewarding an experience. I did have fun with it. It's a pretty good implementation on Steam there. And for now I'm rating it 7 out of 10. Definitely it's better playing with the advanced rules of altitude instead of just the basic card movement flying around. That adds another interesting element to the game. But I can see myself continuing to explore it a bit on Steam, though I'd rather be playing it with a small group of people, each of us controlling our own airplane. That'd be way more fun. I've got some more solo gaming for the next one, and this one was some more doctor's office chess. Basically playing chess on my phone app while I was sitting in another doctor's office. Now, before I go on to talk about all the games that I rated 8 and higher for the month, let me send out a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, especially to my higher tier supporters. All of you just help me keep going no matter what challenges I face, so I appreciate you so much. Now I'm going to move on to some more gaming with my kids, and so we pulled out Mechs vs. Minions, and we played the next scenario in the game. It's funny, my older boy, who's 13 now, Evan, before we played, he was like, I don't know, I don't really like that game. And I was like, well, let's just try it and see how it goes. And so we sat down, we played through the next mission, and at the end of it, Evan was like, yeah, you know what, I actually really do like that game. And then Wyatt, who is now 11 years old, after we finished the scenario, he's like, don't put it away, Dad, I want to keep playing. So he kept activating his mech and was running around the board, just wiping out all the minions that remained. Even after we'd finished the game and completed this scenario, he wanted just to keep playing it with his own little mech there. So obviously both kids enjoyed getting back to that one. I still rated 8 out of 10. It's just such a cool, I was going to say little game, but it's not a little game. It's a cool, huge game. And then Paul and I got back to another old favorite. This is Super Motherlode, a game that's all about mining down further and further into the earth and collecting valuable gems. And it's all built around deck building, so as you collect gems, you'll spend them on more powerful cards to add to your deck, which will allow you to do better mining, and ultimately ending up with the most points. I've had this for a while. Paul and I have both played it a bunch in the past. We both rate it 8.5 out of 10, so it's no wonder we got back to this old favorite again. Speaking of old favorites, though this one I guess is a newer favorite, Paul and I got back to Planet Unknown. At this point, between the two of us, we've pretty much played all of the asymmetrical factions and asymmetrical planets, but when I was looking through the rulebook here, I realized that we could actually play some of the Kickstarter exclusive planets on the planets that I actually have in my copy of the game. So for those of you who own the game, what we did specifically was we played the Kickstarter exclusive planet Charybdis on the planet Persephone. All that's required for that planet is that the player has to start building in the middle of the planet and work outwards rather than starting on the edge like usual. And then we played the planet Yaks, which is the Kickstarter exclusive, and we did that one with the planet Petra, and we said that the energy lines on Petra were the spaces that the rovers couldn't drive on until they were covered with planet tiles. So that worked pretty well as stand-ins for the Kickstarter exclusive stuff, although I did read that the publisher is going to be releasing all those Kickstarter exclusive corporations and planets in a package that can be purchased sometime down the road, so I'm definitely looking forward to getting those. I rate the game 9 out of 10, and Paul actually bumped his rating from 9 out of 10 to a perfect 10 out of 10. So this is obviously one of Paul's all-time favorite games, and I can see why. It's one that we both enjoy a lot. Next, I got back on Steam for some more solo gaming. Not a solo gamer. And I played one that I had purchased a while back called Isle of Skye from Chieftain to King. This is a tile-laying game that I have enjoyed for a long, long time. It's basically a sort of game where if you start with Carcassonne and you add on a really interesting economic aspect to the game, and then you throw in some cool point scoring mechanisms that change from game to game to make each play a completely unique experience, then you have Isle of Skye. And so I've loved this game from the very first time I played it. The problem is it doesn't play super well as just a two-player game, so it's been a long time since I've actually been able to get the game to the table, but I'm able to play it on Steam and still enjoy it there. I rate Isle of Skye 8.5 out of 10. Speaking of new favorites, here's another one that's become familiar to you in recent months if you're watching my videos. Paul and I pulled out King Domino Origins again. There's just something about this game that I just love it. I can't really explain it, but speaking of raising ratings, I have actually bumped this rating up from 8.5 to 9 out of 10 after my most recent play. It just gets me in the right spot, whatever it is. Paul rates the game 8 out of 10, so he enjoys it quite a bit too. I'm just happy to keep coming back to King Domino Origins. And then finally, my number one game for the month of March is the game that I was able to purchase thanks to Matthew's generosity, which totally made my month because I was able to pick up a game, speaking of Isle of Skye, that came out with the Isle of Skye Big Box Edition. Now, because of my love of the original Isle of Skye game, when they came out with the first big expansion for it some years back, it was an expansion called Journeyman. I immediately purchased it, but when I read the rulebook for Journeyman, I was like, what is this garbage? I'm not putting all that into my beautiful Isle of Skye game. So I didn't even try playing with the Journeyman expansion. I just turned around and sold that expansion immediately. And so then when they came out with the next big expansion for it called Druids, I read the rulebook first and I thought, oh, this is more like it. I'm definitely getting Druids. So I picked up that expansion. And then I had also picked up a couple of the little promos for it. I picked up a tunnel tile promo as well as a promo of 6 special tiles that could be added into the mix. And so I had a good mix of stuff for my Isle of Skye game, but when I saw the big box expansion, first of all, I kind of laughed because they basically threw everything into the big box except that Journeyman expansion. Even the publisher, I guess, had to admit that Journeyman is kind of a garbage expansion and they didn't want to include it in the big box because they threw everything else in there. They put the Druids expansion in there, they threw the tunnel promos, the 6 special tile promos. Plus they added one or two other elements that are new to the game, such as the Borderlands expansion, and they released it all in one amazing big box. The great thing about it is I hadn't actually had a chance to try the Druids expansion yet, but because of the Druids expansion, Isle of Skye is now a much better two-player game. So I was able to pull it out with Paul and play it 2 players. And thanks to the Druids expansion plus the Borderlands expansion, now the 2 players do have more tiles to choose from. Besides your opponent's tiles, you also have the Druid's tiles that you can purchase, so there's a little bit more variety there. Plus, instead of adding an average of only 2 tiles per round to your little tableau of the kind of clan area you're building up, now with Borderlands and Druids, you're adding an average of 4 tiles per round. So not only does this give you more scoring opportunities, they actually had to provide a couple of plus 50 and plus 100 point score markers to take into account the much bigger scores you're going to end up with as a result of these expansions. But it also creates a much more interesting building phase. Once you've acquired these average of 4 new tiles, the challenge, especially with the Borderlands expansion, of adding all these tiles to your clan in such a way as to maximize your scoring opportunities is pretty big. It took a lot of thinking each round, especially as the game progressed, to try to figure out how to best add these tiles, especially since the Borderlands tiles themselves create kind of dead ends in your territory. You can't build next to the 2 sides of the Borderlands that are kind of bumpy and partially finished. So they create dead areas of your expanding territory, but you also want to include them in there for the scoring opportunities they provide. So there's a lot of thinking involved now with each build phase once you've acquired your new tiles, which is really amazing. So I had so much fun with this. I rate the big box expansion 9 out of 10. Paul gave it an 8.5 out of 10, so he enjoyed it a ton too. And I just can't wait to get back to that. I hope I get to play it again in the month of April. So that was my month of gaming. Please take a second to let me know in the comments about what you have been playing. Are there any new favorites you have tried? Are there any upcoming releases that you're excited to get hold of? And what's been getting to your table lately? Please do let me know in the comments. I'm really interested to hear about it, and I will respond to you if you comment. If you've enjoyed all the work that I've put into creating this video, please take a second to give me a thumb up. I would appreciate that. If you didn't like it, go ahead and leave a thumb down, and then get into the comments and let me know what you didn't like about it so that I can improve in the future. And regardless, I just really appreciate you being here with me today. Cheers. Hi, I'm Josh from the with this, what month is it? January, February, March. And this is because I woke up one morning to discover that it was about 3.5 hours total for the game really that allowed me to fly up to that allowed me to fly up the scoreboard to victory, and made me realize I do like my thematic. It is definitely one of the biggest differences between my ranking and Paul's ranking. It's definitely one of the biggest enjoyed. Well, please do take a second to live. And regardless, I just really appreciate you.